if Laura came back someday. But for now, I want to thank her for her service to the Senate. And, Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Georgia.
I would just note it's never an inconvenience to be deterred by a beautiful lady, and I contend take all the remarks made by the leader about Ms. Dove, and I would only add one thing. In what is the best and greatest institution in America, the United States Senate, a young mother of two has become an institution unto herself, and Laura, we appreciate all that you've done. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that Kate Cavath, Kathy Hoppe, and Michael Finn, interns with the Budget Committee, be given floor privileges for the remainder of today's session.
Without objection.
Madam President, I rise for just a minute to talk about two specific subjects. One of them, a very troubling comment picked up by a microphone that was not believed to be live, made by President Obama to President Medvedev of Russia. It's a troubling comment to me because I spent most of the previous year in the United States Senate as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee working on the New START Treaty, which the Senate adopted with 71 favorable votes a year ago. A treaty that's a treaty on offensive missiles, not defensive missiles, nor strategic missiles. A treaty that began under Ronald Reagan, was ratified by George Bush shortly after George H.W. Bush, shortly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, extended under George W. Bush, and terminated a couple of years ago and needed to be renewed. It's a treaty that did three things. First of all, reduced offensive nuclear weapons held by the Russians and the Americans. Secondly, gave us unilateral access to Russia and the Russians unilateral access to us to trust but to verify the warheads that existed. And third, new identification systems and holographs that made it almost impossible to hide or mimic nuclear warheads. A comprehensive treaty important to America, important to the free world, and, quite frankly, important to Russia. I want to quote from the Washington Post exactly what the President was picked up as having said when he was talking to Mr. Medvedev after their official conversation. And I quote from the Washington Post. On these issues, but particularly missile defense, this can be solved. I underline, nobody knows what this means. But it is important for him to give me space. President Medvedev said back, yes, I understand. And then the President said the following. This is my last election. After my election, I will have more flexibility. That flexibility obviously refers back to this, which was in the first comment. So as a continuing member of the Foreign Relations Committee, one that's proud of the work that we did on the START Treaty, but one that understands particularly the commitments of the country, I think it's important that the President clarify what this meant and how flexibility would be implied if he were reelected as President of the United States. For this reason, in the President's letter to the Senate to endorse the New START Treaty and ask for its ratification, he said the following. You pledged he said the following, that he would pledge in his message to the Senate on the New START Treaty to continue development and deployment of all stages of the phased adaptive approach of nuclear missile defense in Europe, including qualitative and quantitative improvements to such system. That is a unilateral statement. I met with Vice President Joe Biden in his office outside this chamber during the debate. Vice President Biden committed the administration in terms of continuing on missile defense. I met with Secretary of State Clinton. I met with Ellen Tauscher, who was the chief negotiator and one of the chief operatives, former member of the House, working for the State Department. There was never any wiggle room nor need for flexibility. The United States was committed to missile defense in Europe, and we remain committed to this day, and it's important the President reaffirm that and that not be confused or in any way blurred by the comments that were picked up on that microphone. It is too important. It's too important to the country, it's too important to this body, and it's too important to me for us to be able to trust the words of each other without finding sometime later they want flexibility to possibly move from those words. Nuclear defense is very sensitive with the Russians, and I understand that. And if there are negotiations on that, that ought to be in the open, not after we've got time for flexibility. It ought to be forthright. I also want to add there's another missile defense issue that looms out there we've got to pay attention to. Israel is surrounded by missiles with warheads to injure the people of that country and take the country down. A missile defense system for Israel would be equally as important as missile defense deployment would be for the Eastern European countries. So missile defense is a vision of Ronald Reagan, continued under every president of the United States since Ronald Reagan, and it's important we remain committed to it. So I think it's important to understand when the President said, particularly on missile defense, what this meant when he asked for flexibility, because there should be no wiggle room in our desire to protect and defend democracy, not only in the United States, but wherever it exists around the world. Madam President, on one other subject, real quickly, we've talked all week about gas prices, and there's been a lot of demonization from both sides. I'm a pretty simple guy. I was a businessman for 33 years, got a degree in college in business, and studied economics in high school, and learned one principle of free enterprise and competition. Prices are determined by supply and demand. If your supply goes down and your demand goes up, your prices go up. And the contrary, if the supply is plentiful, demand goes down, your prices go down. While you can blame gas companies, presidents' salaries, anything you want to blame, the fact of the matter is we're talking out of the side of our mouth, and particularly in the administration, when it comes to exploration of natural resources in the United States of America. And only can we become energy independent when we develop all of our resources. And I support that. I drive a hybrid car. I'm not just somebody that talks about it. I believe that's important. It reduces my consumption, it extends my miles per gallon, and it's better for the environment. But we have proven through the Solyndra case and other cases that some of the alternative energy sources are either not perfected or, quite frankly, just frankly don't work. So while we're developing ones that do, we should be robustly exploring in the Gulf, in Alaska, in the Midwest, in the Northwest, and offshore, like my state of Georgia, the resources we know exist to raise the supply of petroleum in the United States and lower the price to the American taxpayer. All sources of energy that are safe and reliable should be promoted. That includes nuclear energy. Now, I'm very proud and I'm thankful to the President that he issued the loan guarantee on the first reactors licensed in this country since 1978. They're in Plant Vogtle in Augusta or Burke County, Georgia. But his chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission voted no on that final approval. He was outvoted 4-1, but he voted no. That sends a signal that we may talk on one hand about having robust development of all resources, but when it comes to playing our hand on the actual vote, we really don't do it. Same thing's true with the Keystone Pipeline. You can't just approve the pipeline to the south without connecting it to the north, because if you do, you don't get the petroleum. So very simply, my message is this. We can blame whoever we want to blame, but the fact of the matter is, facts are stubborn things, and supply and demand is what dictates price. We should be robustly exploring the natural resources of the domestic United States of America for less dependence on foreign oil and more dependence on our own oil, where we know we have rich resources. We should pay close attention to our environment, and we should recognize that no country in the world has done a better job in the modern era since the Industrial Revolution of cleaning up its environment than the United States of America. No one looks after its environment harder than the United States of America. We owe it to our people to look equally hard at the cost of gasoline, the price of petroleum, and the robust exploration of our own natural resources here at home for less dependence overseas. Madam President, I yield back my time and defer to the senator from Louisiana who has a lot of offshore resources of his own.
Madam President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Madam President. I, too, rise to talk about one of the most pressing challenges that Louisiana families, indeed most American families, face, and that is the price at the pump and the enormous hit that is to their family budget, their pocketbooks, their wallet. It is really making life very, very difficult in the midst of a very weak economy. Just a few years ago, the price was $1.84. That's on the day Barack Obama was sworn in as President of the United States. Now it's more than doubled. It's $3.80 plus. It seems to be rising every day, and that is a real crisis to a lot of American families. We should be committed here in the Senate, here in Washington, to connect with the real world and focus on real problems and real crises. And for millions of Louisiana and American families, that is absolutely it. Unfortunately, I don't see real solutions and a real policy to address that coming out of the President or some of my colleagues here on the Senate floor. Right now, to the minute, as we speak here on the Senate floor, the President is speaking at the White House, and he's laying out his proposal to raise taxes on domestic energy companies and domestic oil and gas production. That's not a policy that's going to help Louisiana American families with the price at the pump. In fact, it's a policy that's going to make it worse and not better. Folks get it in the real world. They certainly do in Louisiana. When you increase taxes on something, those are costs that almost every business, if they possibly can, are going to pass on to consumers. That's pushing prices up, not down. It's also the first rule of economics. As my colleague from Georgia said, supply and demand. If you tax something more, you get less of it. If we increase taxes on domestic energy producers, on domestic oil and gas, we will get less of it. And less supply means price goes up. So two compelling reasons why this proposal isn't going to help Louisiana families, American families, with their struggles with the price at the pump. It's going to make it even worse when it's been getting worse on its own for a lot of related reasons very, very dramatically. So that isn't a policy. That isn't a common sense or a real-world solution. Likewise, one of the few other things I've heard from the President in terms of this is essentially begging other countries to increase their production. And I don't think that is a policy or a policy worthy of America either. I think the perfect symbol for that approach is the President bowing to the princes of Saudi Arabia. It's a symbol of his approach to trying to deal with price at the pump, and it's not good enough, and it's not worthy of the American people. Other folks have also adopted this approach. Senator Schumer, our colleague in this chamber, recently wrote Secretary of State Clinton, in fact, February 28, 2012, just a few weeks ago, quote, "To address this situation," meaning the price at the pump, "I urge the State Department to work with the government of Saudi Arabia to increase its oil production, as they are currently producing well under their capacity." Begging Saudi Arabia. That's not an adequate solution, and it's not a policy worthy of America. President Obama's own Energy Secretary, Secretary Chu, said even more recently, March 20th of this year, quote, "We're very grateful that Saudi Arabia has extra capacity, and I feel confident that it can fulfill any potential deficits, at least the way the current markets are now, the current demand, I should say, are now." Again, begging Saudi Arabia, begging the Middle East, begging other countries. That's not an adequate policy, and it's not a policy worthy of America. President Obama has done a world tour doing some of this in other countries. Notably, in March 20th in 2011, when my part of the country was still struggling with a de facto moratorium in the Gulf of Mexico, a permit logjam blocking us from producing good, reliable American energy, putting Americans, Louisianians to work, the President went to Brazil to beg them to produce their resources and to promise them that the United States would be a great customer. Quote, "We want to help you with the technology and support to develop these oil reserves safely. And when you're ready to start selling, we want to be one of your best customers. At a time when we've been reminded how easily instability in other parts of the world can affect the price of oil, the United States could not be happier with the potential for a new, stable source of energy," close quote, meaning drilling in Brazil. I have to tell you, this was like rubbing salt in the wound to most Louisianians. As I said, this was March 2011, a year ago, and we were still suffering from a continuing de facto moratorium that the President had imposed following the BP incident. And so he was going to Brazil, urging them to drill, urging them to explore, committing America to that, and refusing to do it in America in the Gulf of Mexico. That's not a common-sense solution. That's not a real-world policy. That's not a policy worthy of America. None of this begging is. Now, Madam President, other countries do have an energy policy, and it's not begging. It's developing. It's controlling their own future. Very recently in the press, and I'll submit this for the record, there have been reports that PetroChina has now become the leading company publicly traded in terms of production of oil, far surpassing big oil and all the other companies that have been demonized by my colleagues on the left here on the Senate floor. The Chinese aren't going around the world begging. The Chinese are developing. The Chinese are trying to control their own destiny, and PetroChina is now the leading company in terms of producing oil. Petrobras in Brazil is another example. Brazil is developing their resources very aggressively. That's what I referred to when the President went there a year ago and applauded them and encouraged them. We've given them U.S. resources to do it in terms of loan guarantees, and the President absolutely promised we'd be a great customer. The Brazilians aren't traveling the world begging. The Brazilians are controlling their own destiny. The Brazilians are responsibly developing their own resources, and our President even applauds that while refusing to do the same here in this country. And it's interesting, according to recent press reports, which I'll also submit for the record, there is a budding and building relationship between Brazil and China is taking advantage and forming into contracts to take advantage of that resource. We should learn a thing or two from other folks around the world, and we shouldn't just beg. We should build and develop. We should take our own future into our own hands. And we have an enormous opportunity to do that. Madam President, the United States is actually the single most energy-rich country in the world, bar none. When you look at total energy resources, we lead the world. Russia is second. Other countries follow way behind. Saudi Arabia is third, but cannot compare in terms of total resources. No Middle Eastern country can, and China is below that. We have the resources. We're the single most energy-rich country in the world. This map shows it. Enormous reserves, particularly shale in the west, natural gas in finds on land and offshore, enormous potential and reserves of oil, hundreds of years' worth, literally. So what's the problem? The problem is we're the only country in the world that puts well over 90% of those resources off limits and doesn't develop them. But we can do better. We can reasonably, responsibly, safely open up that access. We can do what Brazil is doing. We can do what China is doing. We don't have to beg. We can have a policy worthy of America and Americans. We can take control of our own destiny. And what will that mean? It'll mean great U.S. jobs, which by definition can't be outsourced. You can't have a domestic energy job producing good, reliable energy here in the United States and outsource it to China or India. We'll build more energy independence, not having to beg Saudi Arabia or go to Brazil as a customer or anything else. We'll even increase revenue to lower deficit and debt. After the federal income tax, the biggest source of revenue to the federal government is royalty or revenue on domestic oil production, second only to the federal income tax. It would be enormous new revenue to reduce deficit and debt. And of course, we can help lower the price at the pump. We can increase supply, which lowers price. So, Madam President, I urge us to do what the American people want us to do, to adopt common sense, to adopt a real policy, to take control of our own destiny. Begging is not a policy, at least not one worthy of Americans. This tax proposal to increase taxes on U.S. oil companies and domestic oil production is not a policy that will do anything but increase the price at the pump, decrease supply. That's the opposite of what we need. Let's do what will make a difference, increase supply, control our own destiny, do more right here at home. With that, Madam President, I yield back the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Arkansas.
Thank you, Madam President. In a moment, I'm going to speak about energy. But first of all, as I was waiting to have the opportunity to do this, I want to thank Senator McConnell for giving us an update on what's going on in Kentucky. We do a lot of very, very important things here. One of the things I'm going to talk about, talking about energy is one of the most important. And yet it is good to hear the stories of ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things. And this truly is what our country is all about. And I know that my thoughts and prayers are with the people of Kentucky. But it is so refreshing. We talk a lot about our problems, but that's the strength of America, is people like the folks in Kentucky and all throughout America that rise to the occasion as they need to. The increasing price of gas is a costly reminder of how dependent our country is on foreign oil. This is one of the most pressing issues that we face today because the price at the pump directly impacts our everyday lives, and Arkansans are telling me they're worried about what it's doing to their bottom line. Americans are frustrated with the increasing cost of gas, and rightfully so. In my home state of Arkansas, the cost for a regular gallon of gas is up 22 cents from a month ago, according to AAA. The letters, calls, emails, and Facebook posts I receive from Arkansas are saying the same thing. It's harder to fill up their tanks while making ends meet. Arkansas families are faced with tough choices because of the rising prices are dipping into our families' disposable incomes. The increasing expense for gas puts a strain on family budgets. Earlier this week, I hosted a teletown hall with Arkansans from all throughout the state. And while I expected, the major discussion to be about this issue, I really was surprised at how much it dominated the conversation. During the event, we took an informal poll asking participants if the increase of gas has forced significant changes in their daily habits. 78% of those who answered said the price had had a significant impact. Sarah from Mountain Home, Arkansas said on her Facebook page that the increase in gas prices has forced her family to allocate more money for fuel expenses, which leaves less money for food, making it frustrating. Sarah and other Arkansans should not have to choose between spending on gas to get to work and the necessities that they need in the household. Chris from Mena wrote that he notices an increase in the price of groceries. People should be aware, Chris is telling us that people should be aware of how fuel costs affect everything we buy, everything we do. I agree with Chris because the increased price for gas adds to transportation costs that are passed along to consumers. Donnie Smith, the CEO of the Springdale-based Tyson's Foods, told the Arkansas Business Journal that with Springdale as a price point, there's been an increase of more than 55% in the cost of diesel in the past 5 years. This is significant because the company uses fuel to transport feed to family farmers, chickens to and from the farms, and finished products to customers around the world. American families and businesses deserve a plan that will help bring down the prices at the pump. The legislation before this chamber proposed to raise taxes on American energy producers. This won't change supply and demand, and Senator Isaacson just a few minutes ago talked about, these are basic truths. Supply and demand does control cost. This will do nothing to that. Once again, hardworking Americans will be left with the bill as a result if this bill were passed. I believe a better way begins with adopting an energy strategy that increases our production of American energy in a clean, efficient way through developing wind, solar, and hydrogen technologies, as well as tapping into the vast majority of natural resources that our country is blessed with. The reality of our country's non-existent energy policy is it forces us to rely on the Middle East for oil. We import about 9 million barrels of oil every day, half of our supply. This is costly to our economy, our citizens, and it threatens our national security. This is the only developed country in the world that refuses to use its natural resources. Opening up Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and increasing offshore exploration on the outer continental shelf is a step in the right direction that puts us on a path of energy independence. We can boost our domestic energy supply through the development of the Keystone XL pipeline. The proposed 1,700-mile pipeline would transport 700,000 barrels of oil per day from Canada to U.S. refineries in the Gulf Coast and allow us to get a reliable and secure oil from our largest trading partner and trusted ally. Unfortunately, while I support this project and voted in favor of it several times in this chamber, the project was rejected by the majority after President Obama took the time to lobby his members to vote against it after vetoing the project earlier this year. There is no time like today to pass legislation to fully utilize the resources that we've been blessed with in our country. But this should not come at the cost of our energy producers. And with that, I suggest the absence of a quorum. I'm sorry.
Mr. President.
The senator from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. If you would please let me know when I have used 5 minutes, I would appreciate that. Mr. President, we have a very important vote in front of us that really goes to the question of whether or not consumers are going to continue to be held hostage by basically having one energy source at the pump, or whether we are going to really give competition to the oil companies and we are really going to give consumers choice. You know, I believe we need to do everything. There's no question about that in my mind. But it doesn't just mean having a tax code that has embedded for almost 100 years special tax breaks and subsidies for the oil companies and the other new clean energy alternatives that are growing and creating jobs in our country do not have the same treatment. In fact, they limp along with a tax cut that expires every year, not sure if it's going to continue, which is what's happening right now. People are losing their jobs right now in the areas of wind production and other areas because they're not sure what's going to happen. And yet, we give preferential treatment to an industry right now whose top 5 companies are making about $260,000 a minute. A minute. People in Michigan, the average wage does not equal $260,000 a year, and yet $260,000 a minute in profit, and we as customers, as consumers, have the great privilege of, on the one hand, paying whatever they want to charge at the pump because there are no alternatives and not enough choices, and at the same time, out of the other pocket, we get to subsidize them. Now, 100 years ago, those subsidies probably made a lot of sense. I'm sure I would have voted for them. As we were starting the new industrial economy, incentivizing the production of oil certainly made sense. I still support the efforts for small businesses and local efforts, but the top 5 companies do not need taxpayer subsidies right now when they have the highest profits of anyone, any business in the world. So what are we talking about? We're talking about in tough times with budget deficits, when we need to be focused on jobs and getting us off of foreign oil, making choices that make sense for the future and not the past. And that means closing down these special subsidies for the top 5 companies, again, who are earning in profits about $260,000 every single minute we are standing here, and turning those dollars over to new clean energy alternatives, whether it be biofuels, wind, solar, electric batteries, all of the things that need to happen, natural gas, which my colleague from New Jersey has been the champion of, so that we actually have real competition, and you can actually go look at that price at the pump and say, you know what, it's too much. I'm going to do something else. Now, we're beginning that process with new electric vehicles, and I'm proud that those are being made in Michigan. We have advanced biofuels. Right now, if we didn't have advanced biofuels at the pump, in the few places that we do, we'd actually see prices $1 higher on average than they are right now. So there's a little bit of competition. But we have a long way to go, and this bill takes dollars from subsidies that are no longer needed, they don't make sense from an American taxpayer standpoint or energy standpoint, takes those dollars, moves it over to continue 19 different tax cuts. 19 different tax cuts for entrepreneurs, small businesses. Those are creating the new clean energy alternatives in the future. Now, some of my colleagues on the other side have said that taking away government subsidies will increase prices, which is amazing to me. Somehow, Mr. President, Friday seems to increase prices. Memorial Day seems to increase prices. I think, you know, whatever the market will bear increases prices. But when the CEOs came to the Finance Committee of the big 5 companies, I actually asked them, in fact, if they're saying, you know, folks are saying that taking away government subsidies for them will increase prices, I said, how much do we have to pay you to bring down the price? Give me a number. How much do we have to pay you to bring down the price? And finally, one of the CEOs actually said, well, I did not say we would be raising gas prices at the pump. I did not really hear anyone else say that either. So that's what they said. They were not willing to go on record as saying that they would raise prices at the pump. Instead of throwing huge government handouts at some of the most profitable companies ever, we should be paying down the debt, and we should be providing tax cuts for the jobs and the new alternatives for the future. And I urge my colleagues to support this very important bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey is recognized.
Mr. President, I have been monitoring the debate on my Repeal Big Oil Tax Subsidies Act, and I keep hearing over and over again from our friends on the other side of the aisle that if we just keep giving the oil companies taxpayer money, that they'll do the right thing. The problem is we already know that's not true. First of all, the United States has only 2% of the world's oil reserves, so we cannot drill our way out of this problem even if we wanted to. But more importantly, we cannot trust the big 5 oil companies to simply do the right thing. Let's look at the record. Last year, the big 5 oil companies took $2 billion of your money and saw their profits shoot up to $137 billion, an impressive 75% increase in profits. But did they use that extra money that we gave them in our subsidies to produce more oil? No, they didn't. They took your money and they didn't produce a drop more of oil. Despite the fact that overall U.S. oil production is higher now than it has been in the last 8 years, last year these 5 companies actually produced 4% less oil. So here's another way to look at it. As each of these companies pocketed our subsidies to pad those profits, they did not use this windfall to produce more oil. If you take the word of our friends on the other side of the aisle, we have a contract, in essence, with these 5 companies. We pay you $2 billion and you give us more oil. Last year, they broke that contract and produced less. So instead, it appears that these poor oil companies took the taxpayers $2 billion, and instead of having to suffer with only $135 billion in profits, they made $137 billion in profits last year.
Senator, yield for a question.
I'd be happy to at the end of my remarks. What a heartwarming story of Robin Hood in reverse, taking from the American taxpayer to give to the rich. So congratulations, Big Oil. You got $2 billion extra in profits, and we got 4% less oil. But of course, we're not just seeing less oil, we're also seeing the American driver gouged with higher gasoline prices. So what happens when taxpayers are forking over $2 billion in subsidies a year to highly profitable oil companies who in turn produce less? We get a double whammy with $4 a gallon gas at the pump and a bigger burden on taxpayers. How is that a fair return on our taxpayer dollars? It's pretty generous to Big Oil, which stands to profit $1 trillion over the next decade while getting $24 billion in subsidies, but it's a bad deal for consumers struggling to make ends meet. So first, the Repeal Big Oil Tax Subsidies Act takes back $24 billion in taxpayer subsidies to Big Oil, stops that insanity. The next step the bill takes is investing in alternatives to oil, biofuels, natural gas, propane, refueling infrastructure for these fuels as well. And by investing in these alternatives, we finally give Big Oil some competition in the marketplace that will give consumers the choice to use cheaper fuels and also drive down gas prices. For those reasons, I urge my colleagues to join me in getting back to reality and stop subsidizing industries that need it the least and start investing in the 21st century industries that will help us compete with China, that will create jobs, that will improve our environment and make us more energy secure. It's time we stop trusting Big Oil to do the right thing with our money and use it on things that actually make sense. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Republican leader is recognized.
Mr. President, I just have one question before this morning's vote, one simple question. Is this really the best we can do? Is this the best we have to offer folks who are staring at $4 a gallon on gasoline? A bill that even Democrats admit won't do anything at all to lower the price of gas? Is this the best we can do? And a process that blocked any other idea from even coming to the floor for a vote. No other idea has been allowed other than a proposal that will inevitably raise the price of gas at the pump. Does anybody really think the Senate has done its job on this issue? Well, if you don't, if you think we should do more for the American people at a time when they're paying $4 a gallon for gas, then raise taxes on energy manufacturers and block a pipeline from Canada, then you ought to vote against cloture. You should stand with Republicans and insist that we do more to lower gas prices in this country. I see the President made a statement a little while ago in support of this proposed tax hike. My question is, where was the White House when the Democrats voted to actually get off of this proposal? Maybe they were too busy lining up votes against the Keystone Pipeline. Maybe the President was too busy telling the Russians about how he's hoping for more flexibility. My point is the Democrats don't have to take orders from the White House. They don't need to serve the President's political strategy. They can do what their constituents want them to do on this issue. They can vote to stay on this bill and fight for real solutions to the problems of high gas prices and any other number of issues the Democrats refuse to face, for that matter. We can use this institution to actually make a difference. And I hope at some point that's what my colleagues on the other side decide to do. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
All time has expired. The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on S-2204, a bill to eliminate unnecessary tax subsidies and promote renewable energy and energy conservation, signed by 16 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on S-2204, a bill to eliminate unnecessary tax subsidies and promote renewable energy and energy conservation, shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rules. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka, Mr. Alexander, Ms. Ayotte, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Balkis, Mr. Begich, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bingaman, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, Mr. Brown of Ohio. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo. Mr. DeMint. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Franken. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Heller. Mr. Hoeven. Mrs. Hutchison. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inouye. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans.
No.
Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Mr. Kerry. Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Cole. Mr. Kyle. Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Manchin. Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Ms. Markowski. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Snow. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Mr. Webb. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Blumenthal, Boxer, Brown of Ohio, Cardin, Franken, Gillibrand, Harkin, Leahy, Menendez, Merkley, Murray, Pryor, Reed of Rhode Island, Rockefeller, Sanders, Stabenow, Tester, Wyden. Senators voting in the negative: Coburn, Cochran, Corker, Crapo, DeMint, Inhofe, Isaacson, Johans, Johnson of Wisconsin, Landrieu, Lugar, McConnell, Moran, Murkowski, Risch, Rubio, Vitter, Webb. Mr. Wicker, no. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Bennett, aye. Ms. Mikulski, aye. Mr. Conrad, aye. Mr. Casey, aye. Mr. Begich, no. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, no. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, aye. Mr. Warner, aye. Mr. Portman, no. Ms. Ayotte, no. Mr. Graham, no. Mr. Chambliss, no. Mr. Durbin, aye. Mr. Coates, no. Mr. Carper, aye. Mr. Hoven, no. Mr. Lee, no. Mr. Inouye, aye. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Grassley, no. Mr. Sessions, no. Mr. Bingaman, aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Heller, no. Mr. Blunt, no. Mr. Burr, no. Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. Enzi, no. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, no. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mr. Kyle, no. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Mr. Barrasso, no. Mrs. McCaskill, aye. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Paul, no. Mr. McCain, no. Mr. Nelson of Florida, aye. Mr. Kerry, aye. Mr. Shelby, no. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin, aye. Mr. Whitehouse, aye. Mrs. Hagan, aye. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Udall of New Mexico, aye. Mr. Akaka, aye. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Lautenberg, aye. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Feinstein, aye. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Manchin, aye. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Reed of Nevada, aye. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mr. Cornyn, no. Mr. Alexander, no. Ms. Snow, aye.